Hey there, folks. Let's talk about the idea of conflict. Now, conflict simply is described as the confrontation between one or more parties aspiring towards incompatible or competitive means or ends. This is from the University for Peace. Basically, what they're stating is there are two different groups or people who both want one thing, and what one side wants, it's impossible for the other side to have. So it's like a square peg, round hole. They don't go together. Thus, you're going to have some form of competition. Now, when we're looking at competition, or in conflict, we frequently look at the unitary actors theory, so to speak. So this is kind of the viewpoint that leaders of a conflict party represent the entire group. Now, the problem with this is that is not actually the case. This is an oversimplification of a conflict, oversimplification of the reality on the ground, and because of that, you don't really get much progress. It's harder to come to some realization. Examples of this would be like the belief that the president or prime minister of a country represents the viewpoint of every single individual within that country. That's certainly not the case, so we can't take that belief set when we're looking at conflict. A good example of this would be the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and situation, war and violence and all that lovely conflict going on right through here. When we look at that, the belief set that every single Palestinian agrees with Hamas is completely wrong. It would be an oversimplification, just like the belief that every single Israeli believes what Netanyahu is saying would be wrong. So it's important to understand that conflicts are, by definition, very complex, and we should not break it down into this simple viewpoint of one person represents everyone and the other person represents everyone. That is not the case, and it doesn't really lead to much solution. Latent conflict is one thing to talk about. This is phase one of a conflict. This is the first set. This is where there's a presence of inequality or oppression, and it's not openly discussed or challenged. So basically, outwardly, an outside observer looking at the situation, they wouldn't really see much of a conflict going on. It's present, but you really wouldn't see it if you're not a part of that group, right? So if you were the one being oppressed, you're obviously going to feel that, but the outside group may not see that. It's going to be the latent side. Then we get to overt conflict. This is where there's a visible clash between one or more parties. The situation that seems peaceful for the outside observer has now turned into violence. Countries and states that are in control frequently want to neutralize the conflict. The reasoning why is because conflict leads to instability. By definition, when a nation or a state is fighting within their state, that is going to lead to an instability, make it harder for individuals to stay in power, harder for the government to be effective, and they're going to want to neutralize the conflict. Now, that can lead to some problems, as we will discuss a little bit later on. Now we're going to look at the idea of sustainable peace. Sustainable peace is the idea that peace is going to last. So it is important to understand that simply having a conflict doesn't necessarily mean something is bad. And this is because conflicts can lead to sustainable peace. Now, examples of this could be, if we're talking about the ideas of like racial oppression, that is a conflict, so one group standing up and fighting against that, bringing about long-lasting peace without that racial oppression, that would be a positive view of conflict. So just when we're looking at conflict, it is important to understand that just because there's a conflict, that doesn't necessarily mean bad. Again, bad and good objective, particularly when we're talking about politics, so do understand that. Sustainable peace, by definition, is the long-lasting, durable, and harmonious relations between groups and between people. This is going to be that idea of positive peace. Conflict can bring about positive peace, so it is important to understand that. Now, when we're looking at the idea of conflict, we have one party and two parties. Again, by definition, they are going to have a difference. There is going to be tension. They both want one thing. That cannot be both true. Now, when this happens, each side is going to have really three different choices to make. The first choice is the idea of a destructive conflict. This is violent, back and forth, one side going after the other side. Violence is not going to be good for the overall stability of the state. Problems happening here, and it is destructive. You could have a constructive conflict where you're working and trying to come to a greater understanding. This would bring about the idea of positive peace eventually. The example I gave of like racial inequality, fighting against that and bringing about at peace. The idea of fake harmony right here, which is the idea of everything looks okay, but in reality it's not the case. So this would be negative peace. This would be that latent stage of the conflict. The conflict is there, you just don't outwardly see it. So again, this all comes from the idea of conflict. What's it good for? From Joe Goodstand, you can see right down there in the citation. This is that idea and kind of breaks down the 3 different choices that individuals have in terms of conflict. Looking at the idea of civil unrest, this is where the situation is visible and overt conflict. So the conflicts start to become between larger groups of civilians and the government. So a large number of individuals are standing up. It's not a few individuals or a small group. It's a large number of or a large percentage of the population in a particular area going against the government in some way. This conflict is only going to resolve when both parties satisfy their desires. You can't have this kind of back and forth until the conflict is resolved and people get what they need. There's not going to be peace in this conflict. You can have violence and arrest of this, so governments will respond frequently by suppressing those who are protesting and trying to advocate for what they're wanting. This can lead to the idea of fake harmony, so it might stop the protest and might look outwardly peaceful. However, the violence and the systematic violence that led to the motivation of conflict in the first place is very much present, and that conflict will ultimately rise up once more. There is the idea of the concern of rushing to peace. So if you simply just try to bring about peace, are you actually bringing about peace, or are you just stopping the conflict temporarily? So that is an important thing to understand as well, particularly when we're talking about the role of mediators. Mediators, by definition, are third parties who come in to resolve a conflict when both sides cannot be trusted to work and actually bring about peace. So if you have one side that has a really strong view and the other side has a really strong view, you're going to have that imbalance of power. They're not going to be able to work together. You bring in a mediator, a third party who has some stake in both sides and can play a role and bring about long-lasting peace. These are much more common in today's day and age compared to historically, largely due to the Srebrenica and Rwandan genocide. So genocide, the definition right here from the Rome statutes, you can see here. So when these are happening, individual mediators are much more likely to get involved and to stop the conflict from happening. Benefit of mediators is it can stop the violence, right? So it can stop the actual killing of individuals and the physical harm of individuals. However, the systematic violence can still be there. Also is mediators can bring in their own individual interests. So maybe they have an interest in something that's going on in the state, maybe natural resources they want to stay, they want trade deals, something of that nature. Therefore, they could be maybe mitigating and mixing the situation in a way that benefits them. So there are some positives and negatives that come with mediators. Comments or questions, do let me know. Otherwise, I will see you later. Good luck.